Perfect. We're recording now, so let's give everyone 2 more minutes, and the recording will be shared with you afterwards. Okay, it's 3:05. Let's get started. I can still see that some people are connecting, which is great. The participation is marvelous, so thank you very much for that. If you hear some, notifications in the background, it's just, my computer notifying me that there are people in the lobby. So sorry for that. But without further ado, let's start so that we can finish on time and not be here too much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining in such large numbers. My name is Shimon, and I will introduce myself a bit more in detail later on. But before I start with the intro story I want to tell you and everything that I have in terms of content, I just wanted to raise one technical remark. So you can see a Slido code on the title slide in front of you. Please open either Slido app or go to their website, slido.com, and there will be a text field where you will be able to enter this code. Don't worry, it's not for some quizzes or too complicated interactions. It's just so that you can ask questions anonymously. We find that usually people, when they want to discuss something which may be a bit more personal in terms of their financial situation, they find it more comfortable to ask anonymously. So you are able to raise questions there. You can ask them throughout the presentation. I have it on my phone next to me, so I will see the questions. If it's something directly related to the slide being presented at that moment, I will explain it immediately. But also feel free to ask random questions about financial topics that are of your interest, because there's a Q&A block towards the end of the session where I will be happy if we can discuss anything that's on your mind, so it doesn't have to be directly connected to any slide or even specifically to the topic being presented today, although those questions are preferred. And we can have a discussion chat about that towards the end. I can tell you my opinion. You can maybe share yours. So really feel free to ask questions. I will be really happy if we have a meaningful discussion towards the end. So if someone maybe could also copy paste the code into the chat while I'm giving the introduction, that would also be perfect. It will be in front of you for roughly 2 more minutes. Okay. That being said, let's get done with technical things and start with today's topic. Thank you, Mati. Thank you very much. So let's get started with today's topic. I like to start these presentations by giving a simple analogy. I like to think about financial health as being very comparable to taking care of your physical health, and taking care of your personal financial situation to be relatively similar to taking care of your physical health. I like to say this analogy because, taking care of yourself physically in terms of health is a pretty, well-known topic. Like almost everyone knows it. We probably know and have some friends who go to the gym, who try to track their calories or track the amount of protein they eat over the day, or just, visit doctors for checkups, get vaccinated and similar things, So this is a relatively normal part of the culture. And when you think about financial habits, being healthy in terms of how you handle your finances, there are many, you could draw a lot of good comparisons between this and staying fit or taking care of your physical health. So for example, just like when your caloric intake is greater, when the amount of calories you consume is greater than the amount of calories you are able to burn, then usually this will lead to gaining weight. And if that continues for a long time, that can lead to health issues and be pretty limiting in terms of your freedom and feeling of comfort, right? Just like that, in personal finance, if you spend more money than you are able to earn, and do this over the long run, then you will probably accumulate debt, which will also become pretty stressful and pretty limiting in terms of your freedom over the long run. So there are a lot of good analogies you can draw. However, there's one big difference between finance and, physical health or staying fit. And that is the fact that, especially here in Central Europe, it's not yet that engraved in the culture, right? So when you try to go to the gym, you will probably get support. It will be easy to share your concerns with your friends, to get help from people who are more experienced and everything like that, or from your friends, family, and also get the support. It's kind of cool to do that, right? Whereas with financial topics, we still consider them kind of a taboo, right? We don't like to talk to our friends or seek help from our colleagues or people who are close to us in terms of how much we earn or what financial problems we face, because we consider it to be private. We don't want other people to know how much we earn or that we overspend or that we are in debt or similar things, right? So we're not really open about these topics to each other. We don't discuss them much. And we think that that's a pity, because if we did, and it was less of a taboo, at least to a certain extent, maybe we could share some good tips and inspiration that could help us build habits which would lead to more freedom and less stress in our lives, and could get really quality help. And really the goal of these presentations that I will be presenting to you is to teach people that it's okay and normal to talk about these topics more openly, more loudly than we used to, and also provide such tips, provide some such inspirations so that you can do something specific with your personal financial situation. And I will be happy if over the course of the 3 presentations that you will get here from me, you will get some specific tips and specific situation and maybe an inspiration to talk about these topics a bit more in the future. That's enough for the intro. Before moving on to the specific content of today's topic, let me introduce myself shortly, mainly so that you can know where I take the audacity to teach you anything about these financial topics. So my name is Šimon. Hi, I come from Slovakia. I work in Finax, which is a company that I will introduce shortly, on a position, we call it content and product strategy team leader. I've been working in Finax for the past 3.5 years. The areas that I cover essentially are communication. So that's anything that has to do with external and internal communication of the philosophy and nature of our products. That includes these presentations and webinars, but it also includes any email communication, podcasts. It includes writing articles, communicating with the media and similar things. I also do a lot about product. I sit in the investment committee. So whenever we are creating new investment portfolios or changing them or doing any updates to our products and portfolios, I am usually a part of the process and see into it. That is why I have a lot of practical experience with how investment products can be shaped and what problems you can find on the way. And I will try to share some of those insights with you in these presentations. And then last big area that I am involved with is corporate finance, budgeting, controlling whether everything is going well in terms of the company budget across the year. So, that's not directly personal finance, but it's also something that has to do with tracking, with planning, with having incomes greater than expenses and planning your investments. So we can cross-apply a lot of that into personal finance. Before that, I studied abroad. I studied in the Netherlands at the University of Amsterdam. I also spent 1 semester at the University of Hong Kong doing my exchange. And over these studies, I focused on economics and finance. So that is what my degree essentially is. Okay, enough about me. Now, shortly about the company that I come from. It's mainly important so that you can connect it with the idea of all these webinars. So I've already mentioned that I work for a company called Finax. We are a securities broker dealer, which essentially means that our main product are managed portfolios. So we offer investments, suggest composition to our clients, and manage those portfolios for them so that they can appreciate their money there. We are a company based in Slovakia, but active mostly across Central Europe and also partially in Western Europe as well now. And we offer various products and portfolios for various financial situations that you can see here on the screen. We have some conservative products, which are for short-term saving from up to a few months, something like, a high interest savings account until a couple of years. We have the core product called Intelligent Investing, which is essentially a range of robo-advisory portfolios. Robo-advisory means that if you're a person who doesn't know anything essentially about finance or doesn't know much and doesn't want to spend ages trying to learn what the optimal investment tools are, you can just come to our website, fill in a short questionnaire about your financial situation, about how long you want to invest for, about what your knowledge and experience with investing is, and the algorithm will suggest an appropriate portfolio for your situation and then automate your investments via standing orders. We also have payout products. So that's the annuity. That's for people who already have built up some substantial wealth and want to look for a solution which will continue to protect the money from inflation, but which will automate sort of passive income from the portfolio so that they can draw income from the cushion of money that they've already saved up. And then we, not that recently, but we also became active in the pension scheme, becoming the first European company to provide the so-called pan-European personal pension product, which is an alternative to national third pillars, you can say. It's something like a Europe-wide third pillar, which is transferable across European countries if you want to live in multiple of them over your career. And it also seeks to offer some unique benefits, sort of fresh competition to the third pillar, because there are some problems with it. And we will be talking about that as well over these presentations. However, and that gets me to the point of why I'm saying this. You're watching currently the first lecture in a program that we called Finax Financial Wellness, right? It's a series of 3 lectures that we will go over, together. The reason why we created this is that since day one of our existence, essentially one of the features that everyone appreciated the most about the activities of Finax is that we try to offer a lot of financial education, right? We produce tons of podcasts, articles, media contributions, webinars, and so on that almost always come free of charge on our social media and are published out there for everyone. And the reason we're doing it is first because we believe in the value of education and, teaching people to invest properly is a part of our mission. But we also find that, it's not good to just create a portfolio and throw it out there and let people learn how to use it, because you can use the same portfolio wisely if you know what to expect from it and how to handle it. And you can also, have a good portfolio, but if you don't really understand it, don't know how to handle it wisely, then you can burn yourself and end up losing a lot of money, despite that being a relatively okay product, right? So we found that it's not only important to create portfolios, but also to teach people what to expect from them, how to handle them wisely, what to do if it behaves, in one way or another. And we try to do this so that, they can really use those products properly, so that they are satisfied with them and so that they bring the desired results, right? So it also makes sense from the business perspective. We've been active in educational sphere for 7 years and produced a lot of educational content over those 7 years. And this Finax Financial Wellness is sort of an extract. It's a summary of the main lessons that we included in our content over the years. It is split into 3 topics. The first of them is called Personal Finance Basics and Building Up an Emergency Fund. That is what we'll go over today. The second topic will be about investing as the foundation of wealth building. So there we will go over what you can invest in, how to compose your portfolio, what sorts of investments are suitable for different financial goals, etc. And then the third topic is specifically about a very specific investment goal, which is retirement and retirement planning. So there we will talk about how to secure decent pension, what is the first, second, and third pillar, how to use them, and how you can also use some self-preparation maybe for retirement. So that is what you can expect from this program. What you can expect specifically today are a couple of points. So this first topic includes, firstly, the big why, right? I was told that that's important, sort of understand why even why we are even talking about this, right? Why is taking care of personal finance important? Why is it often underappreciated in our region, in Central Europe, I mean? And we will go over that, try to motivate you a bit in that part. And then once we know that, we will talk about planning and budgeting, how to create an optimal personal budget. We will talk about income growth and career progress and how that should affect budgeting and how you can actively take some steps to work on increasing your income as you age and gain more experience. And then the second big part of today's presentation will be about emergency fund. So that's an amount of money that you have set aside to cover some unexpected expenses, some emergencies that have to be paid for immediately, but you might not have enough money for them just from your regular salary, maybe, or when you lose your salary because you lost your job and unemployment insurance isn't enough, right? So we will talk about what that is, how to create it, and then about some parameters, right? Where to keep it, how large should the reserve for emergencies be, how to protect it from inflation, maybe, and similar questions. And then we have the promised Q&A session towards the end, right, where we can answer questions posted through Slido or through the chat here. So, okay, let's get right to it. We will start by answering the first big question, right? Why do I think that personal finance is something you should care about? Why is that important? Let's start with this simple picture. It's an abstract concept, but I like it because I think it pretty much accurately sums up what personal finance is all about, right? You can see the white line declining, and it's titled as human capital. We can imagine that as your ability to generate income and save, and you can see it increasing as you get older and older. It tries to say the idea that income is probably temporary for most of us. I don't think anyone in this Teams call is willing to work by the time you're 75, by the time you are older, right? Probably all of us will not have enough energy to do that, not enough mental and cognitive capacity, but also not willingness, right? Everyone wants to enjoy their old days, spending time with grandkids, being at home or traveling maybe a bit more, rather than worrying about the stress of work life, right? Probably everyone can, to a certain extent, relate to this, right? The problem is that, and we'll see that in the next slide, the states will have a declining capacity to provide decent pensions as the population of Europe ages, right? And therefore, if you really want to have a decent retirement or maybe stop working at some time, it's good to build up some financial capital. It's good to build some financial wealth, some amount of money that will take care of you once you are unable to work to take care of yourself, right? It can provide you with supportive income. It can provide you with a feeling of safety when you are unable to work that much anymore. It can allow you with freedom to maybe spend more time according to your own wishes, right? But the overall idea is that you transfer some amount of money from times when you are young and full of energy to times when you are older and not able to, work that much anymore. Some people might have the logical, concern or question of, aren't the states for this? Shouldn't the states pay for our pensions and take care of us when we are old? Yes, to a certain extent, that is true. However, there is one big issue. We will talk about it more in detail in the third topic about retirement planning. But there's one issue with the way most pension systems in Europe are set up. And since you are from finance, you probably know this to a certain extent, right? Most of pensions, especially those paid out in our region in Central Europe currently, are financed on a pay-as-you-go basis. That means that you tax a portion of salary of people who are currently working, and you almost immediately redistribute that money to old people. So it's like a pipeline through which money flows from working people to those who are already retired. The problem is that Europe is aging rapidly. We are having fewer kids than before. Fertility rates are declining. People are not willing to have as many kids, or some people are staying childless, essentially, more than in the past. And in Central Europe and Slovakia and countries like that, especially, we also have a big brain drain. That means that even if some kids are born here, they move to study abroad, they find a job, family there, they stay there and pay taxes there. So they cannot finance, our old people. And this problem is only expected to get worse and worse. And that means that pensions and the ability of states to have enough money to pay out decent pensions is expected to decline. What you can see in this graph here is is an illustration of the so-called replacement rate. Replacement rate is the portion of the income that you were used to get when you were working, so something like your average salary when you are towards the end of your career, that you can expect to get from pension, right? So if I used to get, I don't know, 1,000 euros after taxes, and I get 500 euros in, retirement benefits, then the replacement rate is 50%. I got 50% of my previous salary replaced from pensions. And it's expected to decline due to this pressure, because due to limited money, states probably won't be able to either increase pensions as much as salaries rise or increase them to match inflation, maybe even decrease them slightly, although this would be unpopular. But wages are expected to rise much more than average pensions. And that means that, as you can see in the graph, in 2070, which is pretty far away, but many of us will be in retirement then, the replacement rates are expected to be roughly between 20 to 50%, right? Now, while I can imagine limiting expenses from working age somewhat when I'm old, because, if you have a family, the kids move out, you pay off your mortgage and everything, you probably will have lower expenses. Cutting your previous expenses that you were used to by 1/2 or even 3/4, down to 50 or 25% of what you used to get before, that sounds like a tough task, borderline impossible for many. Pension will probably be enough to finance some basic needs like food, like utilities and stuff like that, but probably not, spending, taking your grandkids to trips and stuff like that. So if you want that extra comfort and feeling of safety, then it's good to think about retirement before and save up some money from which you can draw extra income when you're in this age, right? And that is one of the reasons or one of the main goals of personal finance. And then also, let's look at this graph here. What is also a pity, and again, here in Europe, it's more relevant than in many other, than for example in the US or some other countries. We often can save something. Not many people, but some people have substantial savings, but we are not taught very much to take active care of the wealth, right? That means try to actively protect it from inflation or invest it into asset classes that over the long run, over our life, are expected to increase its value, right? Many times, 40 to 60% of the money that we are able to save is held in bank savings, right? So you can see that and I circled the countries in our region, right? In the Central and Eastern Europe region. You can see that many times a very giant portion of savings is just held in banks, where the situation is now slightly better, but over the last decade, when interest rates were zero, they earned no interest, and many banks still offer no interest, right? Even on their savings account, despite the expensive mortgages and everything. So many times this earns no interest and just loses value to inflation, right? So that's one of the problems. And then, the asset classes that, and I'll show you data for that, but that are expected to earn higher profits, right? Because they represent a share of ownership of companies. So equities, stocks, stuff that over the long run beats inflation relatively by a wide margin is often underappreciated, right? And it makes sense. In this region, we don't have a long tradition of investing because we used to be socialist countries. It was impossible to invest for many generations that came before us, so they couldn't teach themselves and they couldn't teach us, right? So it's pretty normal that it's not engraved in a tradition. In Slovakia specifically, you also had a lot of scams where people lost a lot of money by investing. So there's this natural and somewhat also, logical fear of investing. And that's a pity because due to this, even if stock markets or these asset classes make large profits, it oftentimes goes around most people and they just lose money to inflation. So if they want to, get the most out of their money in this wealth building, in this building of retirement savings, it's good to get education and discussion about, other things than just bank deposits so that they can hold more money there and extract those profits. It's sort of illustrated here. You have various things you can invest in and hold your savings in. And oftentimes people in our countries limit themselves to so-called defensive assets like bonds or cash or bank deposits, right? These are okay if you need safety from risk, right? For example, if you have if you want to hold those savings or save up for a very short period of time because you will need the money soon, or if you're super much afraid of risk. But they're not suitable for every goal on this earth. Some goals are decades away. You can afford to have some fluctuations in the value of the investment in the meantime, and you have enough time to wait for recovery of the markets. So for maybe those longer term goals, it's good to not hold money in the bank, but try to make it work and multiply its value, right? And people often, even for long-term goals, even for goals where other types of investments would be more suitable, limit themselves to defensive assets. So that's another reason why we're needlessly losing money where we could not, and reason why taking care of personal finance is important. And then maybe one last reason that I would mention in terms of why taking care of your personal finance is important. I would just say that having wealth, having money, is not just about flexing or having a nice car or for the feeling of making it or something. Money is just a tool to get freedom, and to get freedom in two forms. To get freedom from stress. So you can probably imagine that, living paycheck to paycheck. I think everyone at some point of their lives have experienced that feeling of just waiting until the next salary arrives because you already ran out of money and have to go into some debt or something like that. So that's stressful, indecent. It's oftentimes a reason why relationships fall apart, why we cannot sleep peacefully and everything like that, and don't feel protected from emergencies, right? So that's one reason. But it's also freedom to what you want to do what you want with your time, right? If you have a lot of money, then it's easier to say goodbye to a career you're burnt out from because you're not afraid of being jobless for 2 or 3 months, searching around for a better option, maybe searching around for a switch in careers because your family is covered from your wealth, from the amount of money you have in your bank account, and you can use that to draw supportive income in those times. It's easier to start a business when you have money to take care, of your of the people close to you. It's easier to utilize other opportunities. It's easier to take decisions such as taking a break from working when your kids are being born because you want to spend more time at home. One of my colleagues did that when her first child was being born. So having wealth, it's freedom from stress. It's freedom to use your time as you wish, and that is another big reason why building it up should be a high priority for people. So it's not just a number. It's actually doing things that we care about. Okay, so that was about the why. I hope that now you are relatively motivated about getting money if you weren't before. And now let's jump to the second part. Let's talk about what you can do specifically if you just want to take some first step, right? Maybe you're wondering, I've never done anything like this before or didn't take that much active care. What can I do, right? So the first thing that's good to do is conduct this financial analysis. I like to call it looking in the mirror, right? There might be issues in your financial habits that you don't know about, and you just need to learn how you spend, what your financial situation even is, to be able to assess whether it's good and whether it has room for improvement somewhere. Many times people don't want to do it because they're embarrassed. They might be embarrassed for how much debt they have. They might be embarrassed for some spending that they had in the past, so they rather ignore it and don't ever look at it. But if you don't look in the mirror, you will never be able to learn how to improve, right? So that's why taking this step is important. You can do it in 4 sub-steps. The first would be learning your income. That should be easy for most people. You probably know how much money arrives in your account. Include some annual bonuses, include rental income if you have investment properties, include any other maybe tax bonuses if you have kids or stuff like that. Anything that you can count on. The reason this is important is that your income should be the ceiling on your expenses. If you spend more than this number, you will accumulate debt, and that will become a problem eventually. So like it or not, somehow you have to find a way to put your expenses into this limit. Then the second thing would be wealth, right? This is the amount of money that you manage to sort of set aside, convert into something that is your long-term wealth. So that's anything that you have in a savings account, in banks, in second pillar, in third pillar funds, anything you have in brokerage accounts, approximate value of your house, or anything else that you own. You don't have to spend too much time on this. The idea is to get a rough idea of whether your financial habits up to this point have led you to convert a substantial portion of your income into wealth, or whether you earned a lot but didn't build much savings from it that you can use to get some supportive income in situations or something like that. And that should be an early indicator of whether your financial habits are leading you to, convert a portion of your money into wealth, or of your income into wealth, or not, right? If not, then that's probably a red flag to try to change something about that situation, right? Then comes the third point. This is the most important one, tracking your expenses. So you need to learn how you spend your money so that you can know whether it's aligned with your priorities, so that you can know whether you are actually spending your money on things that make you happy, or whether some categories just don't show amounts that you're not satisfied with and you don't even try to think about because it's just not how much money you want to spend on it, right? So the best way to do this is to open your banking app or anything else where you have your transactions and just track your spending for the last 3 to 4 months. Try to split it into categories. So, there will be a separate bracket for housing, for transport, for family, for food, for restaurants, for hobbies or fun, going out, stuff like that. And try to, come up with the amount you spent on it in the last 3, 4, 5 months, then divide it by the number of months, and you will get sort of an average for the past quarter or for the past couple of months that you spend on each category per month. So you will have some numbers. And already here, maybe some of the numbers will surprise you and you will think that this is unacceptably high and you didn't even have an idea that it accumulated to such a large amount over the month. Maybe some of you are already doing it and will be perfectly fine with the numbers. But, again, you are learning about your habits. You are learning how you are handling your money. So it's an important first step before you do anything else. And then also debt. So sum up your debt, maybe create a table, try to find out what is the remaining outstanding principal, or what the interest rates on those loans are, what the monthly payments are, how much money you lose to them over the month, and similar things. Now, if you subtract the amount of your debt from the amount of your wealth, you will get a metric called net worth, right? So that is anything you own, if you paid off all your debts immediately, right, with a portion of that wealth. And that is anything that remains after you pay off your debts. This net worth is sort of the ultimate goal. The higher your net worth, the higher all the benefits I talked about, right? The more income you can draw in retirement, the more freedom you have to pursue opportunities or take a less paying job that will be more fulfilling to you or anything like that. So all the freedom from stress, freedom to do things we like, all of that comes with high net worth, right? So the goal over the years, when you are doing your annual checkups of your finances, is to increase your net worth and develop habits that allow you to increase it, regularly, to increase it year by year. So that is why it's important not only to find out right now, but also yearly to find out whether your habits are leading you to pay off your debts and increase your wealth. If it's the other way around, your debts are increasing, whereas your savings aren't increasing much, then you have a problem and you probably have unhealthy financial habits that will lead to problems in the long run because you cannot take on debt forever, right? So that is the important first step. And then once you have this, it's important to create a plan for the future, right? So this plan is called a budget. Budget is just a plan of how much you want to spend for each of these categories that I talked about, for these categories like food, like restaurants, like going out, over the upcoming months, right? In a typical month. So that just involves setting some target amounts. Of course, the way you do this is individual, right? Personal finance is super individual. It depends on what we like to do. It depends on how ambitious we are with our savings or stuff like that. But in general, you can come up with some rules of thumb on what usually works for people. So what usually has worked for financial advisors and people who develop literature on this is to structure your budget as follows. So 50 to 60% can go on the necessities, right? So that is things that you just have to pay for, otherwise you would die. So that's having roof above your head, that's repaying your loans, that's paying phone bills, having some basic groceries and clothing. I don't mean now restaurants, because you can cook at home. Restaurants are more like a convenient type of spending, but having food to cook from and having some basic clothing is also a necessity. So this should take 50-60% of your income, maybe slightly more if you're at the beginning of your career and the income is lower and the necessities might sometimes take up a slightly larger portion. Then 30% of the budget it's good to reserve it for nice to have expenses. So those are things that you could live without theoretically, but they are making our lives enjoyable and worth living. So it's important to have them in the budget, right? So that can be anything from traveling, holidays, eating out, going out, getting coffee dates, going to grab the beer, going, buying nicer or better fashion, anything like that, right? You can reserve money for that because if you try to eliminate these expenses altogether, you would probably give up very soon because you wouldn't find your life very enjoyable, right? And then usually it's recommended to try to, squeeze 10 to 20% of savings and investments from your budget. So 10 to 20% of what arrives in your income, in your bank account, it's good to use that for financial goals. So that can be split between various forms of savings and investments. Usually at the beginning, if you don't have an emergency fund, it's good to divert all of these savings into building up an emergency fund. Later on, it can go to various goals. Part of that can fund your retirement. Part of that can be saved up for the kids so that they can have some start to life or so that you can help them finance their education. A part of that can go when you're younger to saving up for a down payment on a mortgage or stuff like that. So this is sort of proportions that if you use should probably allow you to fulfill most of your financial goals while still being able to enjoy your life, right? Now, probably a question is that goes through the minds of many of you is these are nice figures and it's easy to say this to split it according to these percentages, but it just won't be possible from our incomes or something like that, right? If I sum up my expenses, they just take more than my income and I'm unable to save and invest that much. In that case, one more slide before that, right? What is good to realize is that probably the easiest way to increase your savings over your life is not to try to, limit your expenses down to zero, because that's impossible and it would also probably make you give up pretty soon. But it's good to boost your savings as your income grows, right? For most people, as you progress over your career, move to more senior positions with more responsibilities, you will also manage to grow your income as senior positions are usually better paid, right? You should also actively work on this throughout your life. We will have a slide on that. So as your career progresses, you will probably, most of you experience a rise in income, and it's good to use that to partially increase the budget that you have for savings and investments. So whenever you receive a pay rise, increase the standing order that you have in your investment account or something like that. And a part of that to increase your expenses, right? So you can either put that into nice to have expenses or use that to fund the necessities. For some people, income progress will be so successful that they will be able to save a greater portion of their of their income, so have a higher savings rate later on. It's true that for some people, it might be impossible to limit necessities, for example, because once you have school-age kids, and once you have a mortgage, because you got older, your necessary expenses might increase as a percentage. That's also possible, but even in that case, whenever you get a pay rise, you don't have to necessarily boost your savings rate as a percentage of your income, but at least you can increase the nominal amount. So usually the rule of thumb that works for most people or that is often recommended is a 50-50 rule. Whenever I get an increase in my monthly salary, use 50% of that increase to increase the standing order that I have into my savings or investment account. So to increase my automated investments, it's good to have this standing order a couple of days after your paycheck so that you don't even count with that salary. And and use the remaining 50% to increase any expenses that you want to sort of reward yourself a bit more for having a higher income now. But sort of, it's good to reevaluate this every year and try to increase the amount you are saving over your life as your income grows, right? Okay. Now to the question I mentioned before, right? So what if our expenses are too high and we just cannot save and move into those nice percentage numbers that you were talking about. I understand that, and this is usually like the most controversial part of the presentation because because we can't understand everyone's situation and the economy is horrible and everything. But look, when we ask most people genuinely if this month for some reason you received slightly lower income, right? Because there was just no money in the world, that there will be no way to address it. Most people would be able to survive the month on 90% of their income, right? They would just somehow get by. It's not like everyone says that, oh yeah, if I got 90% of my income, I would die in the following month, right? And it's good to at least try to do that, right? So at the beginning of the next month, set up a standing order so that some amount of money leaves to your investment or savings account, and you don't even count on that as having that from the beginning of the month, and just try to survive from the rest. What you can do, and what you will probably try, is to limit some expenses. And the goal of that exercise is to find out whether limiting some expenses, you don't realize that you didn't need them to be happy and that you didn't really need those expenses to live a life that you would consider personally meaningful. And I bet that nowadays there are many expenses in our lives like that when we just can live equally meaningful life even without buying those things, because we buy many things just because it's expected from us, or because we are afraid to say no to some things, or because we just thought that spending would make us happier, but it didn't really. When you are trying to, I see a question in the Slido. Let me answer that immediately because it covers a slide that was recently. Why such percentages? What is the background for that? So the 10 to 20% of savings and investments, the background comes from these people who are called the FIRE movement. I will talk about them in the third lecture a bit. There is a bunch of people who, it's an abbreviation for Financial Independence Retire Early. It's people who try to retire before the official retirement age on their own money. Now, this is super ambitious, and most people probably won't be, either earning enough or be willing to eliminate enough expenses to do that. But they ran these calculations of what portion of your salary you need to save for a given number of years so that you can retire fully on your own money, right? They usually assume some return of the financial markets, that you invest in some low-cost index funds, for example, in stock markets, and they assume some relatively pessimistic scenarios, right? Over the long run, right? They assume some 4 or 5% return usually in those calculations, and they try to find out how you can get a 100% replacement rate from your money, right? The way this is usually structured is that will be in our retirement planning lecture, but they usually assume that once they are retired, they will be drawing money from a payout portfolio composed from 60% stocks and 40% bonds, and use that to sort of receive automatic income over a long period so that they continue, appreciating their money and having it invested even after they stopped working. And then you can run simulations, you can run back tests, you can run tests of how long this money will, last. And usually, when you set up the horizon so that you start somewhere when you're 25 or 30 and finish by the time you're 65, which is the official retirement age in most countries, if you save 15 to 20%, usually you are able to get 100% replacement rate and fully retire on your own money without relying on the state at all, right? So if you save 10 to 20%, so that means that you can save even slightly less for retirement and still having almost enough money to live fully the life you were living before retiring, right? And that is why, usually the 10 to 20% rate is recommended as saving for retirement. We recommend it also, to have it combined for, to also finance other goals, such as maybe a down payment or mortgage or future of your kids from these 10 to 20%, because, in these countries, you also get some savings from the second pillar. You will also get some income from the state. It's not like pensions will be zero in the future. So you don't need to retire fully on your money, as you will have some income from other sources. So you can maybe save 10% for retirement and 10% for other goals, and it should be enough to sort of have enough money for anything, right? And the reason, you then have 50-60% for necessities, 30% for nice to have expenses, is that we don't think it's good to, eliminate expenses you like or eliminate hobbies from your life, because it's important to also live life. Money isn't everything, right? Money is there to protect us from stress and give us freedom later on when we are older, right? But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't live our lives when we are younger, right? So there are some, freaks who just save anything they can because they want to be very rich and they want to retire really soon. But that depends on preferences. Of course, people who have high incomes and who want to save more because they want to retire when they're 35 or 40, they will do that and they will have much higher savings rate, and that's completely fine if that is really what they want. But we think that this is a good rule of thumb to balance, comfort with being safe in the future for most people. That is essentially how usually the ratios were determined. Also by people just trying it and finding out that they followed this budget over their lives and it worked. Like they had money for everything essentially needed that weren't in danger over their lives. So that's also how it evolved in literature and everything. Okay, back to these things. How to optimize your expenses, right? If you want to lower your spending. Oftentimes, I think there will be the misconception or a reason why people often don't like financial advisors is that, or not just financial advisors, but just thinking about their personal finance, is that they think that saving means not enjoying life, right? Cutting out the nice to have expenses and not ever spending any money. That's not optimal, not only because you won't sort of stick to it and you will give it up, but it's also it's sort of like an unhealthy relationship to food, right? You shouldn't be afraid to, you shouldn't have a spending anxiety, right? And be embarrassed for any expense, for any coffee that you buy out, right? That's unhealthy relationship to money. And that will mean that whenever you have some expenses, you will be embarrassed to check how much you, for example, spend in a bar or something like that. And you will stop tracking your expenses. And that is when you will give up, because you won't be able to make progress because you don't know whether you stuck to your budget or not, right? So it's sometimes better to try start saving from fixed expenses, actually, from the necessities, from the most expensive things on our budget. The reason it's good to try to start with these is that these fixed expenses or just necessities are often the most expensive ones. We spend the most of our money on it. They are the most expensive items, housing, food, gasoline into car. That's usually what takes the most of money of our pockets over the month, right? So sometimes if you make one larger sacrifice, in one of these spheres, in one of these expenses, you can save, comfortably enough money to get into a sufficient saving rate just by making that one change, right? And that would be perfect, because you don't even have to change your habits that much. You don't even have to control yourself actively that much. You make one change and you make, you earn or get big saving, and you are fine with that, right? So that is about, or these three types of expenses concern the so-called big three, right? The first of them is housing. Being able to make changes to housing that will save you a lot of money, that depends probably on how old you are or where you are in your life. So when you are younger, like myself, you don't have a family yet, you can choose to live in maybe a smaller flat or share your flat with roommates, so that you can split the costs and sort of pay less for it. I think having roommates is really nice. It doesn't feel so lonely. So that's one way, rather than to live in a one-bedroom apartment, which will usually cost you more, right? So that's one idea. For some people, maybe it's possible to, not live in large cities. I know many people who do this in Slovakia. They work for companies in the capital city, in Bratislava, but they live elsewhere because the nature of their job allows home office. I do understand that this is not possible for everyone, but maybe for some people is able to have home office and live further away from the centers of capital cities, which are super expensive, in maybe smaller cities where the rent prices, when the house prices are lower, and just use home office or commute 1 or 2 times a day into the office when they need to go have in-person meetings and just work the most busy days from home, right? So that can be another idea, like geo arbitrage. And for many people, it can just be searching around to find a smaller flat or a smaller house. Many times people want to have big house with a big garden, everything like that, because that's what's socially expected. And they get a mortgage that's just super impossible for them to fit into their budget, and they are unable to save for the upcoming 20 years due to that, because their mortgage payment is just too high, right? So sometimes maybe opting for something smaller, which might seem uncomfortable at the beginning, but then you find out that you're actually happy because home is about the people you are living with who are there, right? It might work, and it might save you a lot of money on your mortgage payment, right? Or recently, and that will be a relevant topic in these times of declining interest rates. Many people don't know that if you have a high interest rate on your mortgage and it's fixed, but the interest rate decline in the meantime, and now the banks are offering more favorable rates, it's sometimes better to refinance your mortgage, get a new one with a more favorable interest rate that can lead to a significantly smaller monthly payment. Yes, there will be some fee that you will have to pay for early repayment, but if interest rates decline by a percentage point or something like that, then the amount you will save on having a lower monthly payment and lower interest might be worth paying that fee for early repayment. So in this period of declining interest rate, maybe if it continues, if the central bank continues getting them lower and lower, refinancing your mortgage to get a more favorable interest rate might be another way to save on the cash flow that you spend on the bank, right? Then food. We also spend a lot of money on this. Way I did it, I just cook all the time, right? I try to reduce my spending on deliveries, try to reduce my spending on eating in the canteen here at my office building, and just meal prep at home, and for the price of one lunch, cook 4 portions of lunch that I can have in my fridge and bring to work. So that's another way, and a very good way to save a lot of money over the month. Also, maybe purchase less of expensive grocery items, sometimes cook with alternatives that are cheaper, search for budget recipes online. There are tons of tips on Google, right? And then also in terms of transport, one of the good things, my bosses here would be able to tell you more personal stories about this, but is to buy used cars rather than new cars, which can save you a lot of money, but because this is an expensive item, that can be crucial in creating savings. I don't mean used cars that are already broken down and don't work, but just cars that are 3 or 4 years after, that are 3 or 4 years old. The reason is that usually cars lose the highest portion and percentage of their price, of their value, in the very early years of being used, right? You can search it up online. The curve of decline in price is very sharp there, right? So after 3 or 4 years, it's not that the car is significantly less reliable or safe. It's still a car that won't need a lot of servicing costs or repairs because it's relatively new, but its price will have declined by that time disproportionately more than its reliability, right? So sometimes that can allow you to save even 10, 20, depending on how expensive, how large and expensive of a car you want to have, right? But that can allow you to save literally tens of thousands of euros on either payments, leasings, or on savings if you buy it from an amount that you've built up in your savings account already, right? So that can be one point. Or minimizing individual transport. My dad did this actually. Before that, they used to commute individually, and then after we spoke about this for a bit, they agreed with 3 more colleagues that because they live close to each other, that they will pick each other up and commute in the same car and just split the gas bill at the end of the month, or just change the cars, and everyone it's a different person's gas every time. And he told me that it worked, that he was able to save a lot on this transport. So agree with people and commute to work together, or agree with your boss if you could have home office during the most busiest days when the traffic is the worst, so that you can commute just less frequently to work, or maybe use the public transport more if this is financially more viable. Now, this is just inspiration. I do agree that this might not work for everyone. It might be individual, but again, that's why research is important. You can go on Google, search for blogs of people who are in a similar situation as you and manage to save money. Or this is why, honestly, I think it's important to talk about these topics with our friends because, our friends, our family might be in a similar situation as us, might have similar incomes, and it might be good to just ask for help, ask them how they are able to save money or live off their income, right? So this is just, a little idea, but you can get probably more inspiration elsewhere. I can see in Slido a question. Let me read it briefly. I believe a lot of us are on a different side of equation. We now have low interest rates, but in the upcoming years they will be changed for higher current interest rates. Yeah, I understand that that might be an issue, and it already was for many people. So in that case, again, let's hope interest rates decline by as much as possible until before that happens, before your fixation ends. After that happens, again, watch for interest rates declining, right? And try to, and refinance it if they then decline even a bit more. Or, yeah, to be honest, then you can maybe try to make some early repayments before that so that the remaining balance isn't as high when the interest rates jump up. But yeah, there will be. It's good to think about it in advance and count with that in the budget. Okay, and then in terms of fixed expenses, that was the previous slide was about fixed expenses. You can, of course, also save on those nice to have expenses or on those variable expenses that change from month to month. It's a lot just about tracking your spending and always asking yourself whether you spend most of your income on things that actually make you happy. So for many people, they might want to limit the amount they go out and, decide to watch movies or Netflix a couple of Friday nights more. That might apply more to younger people. Some other people might be spending more on fashion and clothing that they find acceptable, on coffees or on anything. Whenever you find something like that and you decide that it's not worth sacrificing your future freedom and comfort for because you will never be able to, save money if you don't limit these expenses, then just try to set an upper limit on that. And once you run out of that, just say no a couple of times until the next paycheck arrives, right? But always ask yourself this question of whether your spending is aligned with what you want in your life, right? Okay, then once you have a budget and you start sticking to it, it's important to manage it, right? That's what most people sort of give up. It's easy to set up a budget, but it's much more difficult to maintain it. So on a weekly basis, it's good to create a habit of tracking it, right? So tracking what your expenses were over the week, what percentage of your budget or target you have already fulfilled or drawn out, and seeing whether either you have enough money and you can reward yourself by some extra spending until the end of the month, or whether you should tighten your belt and say no a couple of times in some areas. Of course, this can be done manually in Excel, in spreadsheets. Some people like doing that. Most people find that pretty boring. So I will talk to you about some personal finance management apps which automate this budget tracking. But still, even if you have an app for that, you need to create the habit of once a week at least checking what percentages you have already spent, how much money you have left until the end of the month. Try to create that habit somehow. You can create a calendar reminder so that you get a notification on a Saturday afternoon to, check your money while sipping your afternoon coffee, right? You can, I don't know, do some other things to remind you of the fact that you have a budget so that it becomes an automatic thing that you just do out of habit every weekend. But at the beginning, you need to nudge yourself into creating that habit. Be creative. Ask for help, Google online what worked for people, but try to create an automatic habit from it so that you always do it. Then once a month, it's good to check whether you adhere to your budget, whether you've overspent somewhere, saved money somewhere, and whether you managed to hit the 10 to 20% savings rate that you should opt for in the long run, right? You can, of course, do budget adjustments. So if you, for example, find that in some category you always overspend and in another you always save some money, then you can increase target amount for one and decrease it for the other. And then once a year, as I said, it's good to track your net worth as well. So not just income and expenses and budget, but also once a year, maybe in early January when you still have time off, track how your savings evolved, track how your debts evolved, see whether your net worth increased compared to the previous year. That means that you're on a good track, that you have healthy financial habits, that everything is good. And also adjust your budget to changing life situations. Sometimes you know that you want to start a family, and that will be associated with many extra expenses, and it's good to include that as a budget category in the year when you're expecting, right? Or maybe some people will have kids who will go to study and they will need a greater allowance for that, right? And it's good to prepare for that in the in advance and count on that expense. I promised to introduce some budget tracking tools. These are things that allow us to automate the process of checking our budget so that we don't have to enter our transactions manually in an Excel. Of course, if you're an Excel freak and want to have that amount of overview and control, feel free to create an Excel spreadsheet and just enter it there manually. But for those of you who sort of know that they would stop doing that after a couple of months, like myself, which I did. I had my spreadsheet, but it stayed untouched for roughly a year now. So for people who want more comfort, try to search for budget tracking tools. This plate is called You Need a Budget. It's probably the most popular one in the US and one of the first ones that existed in the world. You can see it works pretty simply. You pair it with all your bank accounts. You pair it with your account, with your Revolut, with your partner's bank account, and it shows you an overview of your transactions. It allows you to set up budgets, and it tells you what percentage of your budget you've already drawn and how much money you have remaining until the end of the month. You just check it in your phone and so you just need 15 seconds to do that each Saturday to track your budget, right? Revolut also had a pretty nice budgeting tool in their app, so some of my friends were using that. And as an inspiration, we as Finax also have our own budget tracking app. The nice thing about this is that I'm not even selling a product because this comes free of charge. So if you want, you can just download it and use it without making any investment deposit or something like that. It works similarly as I described. So you just pair it with all your bank accounts. If you want, you can pair it also with your partner's bank accounts to have sort of a family or household budget, and it will aggregate them together. It will automatically categorize your expenses into different categories, allow you to create and track budgets, and also you can track changes in your net worth there, right? So you can note how much money you have in different savings, in pension schemes, how much your house is worth, and you can note down your debts and have it as a nice tool to check whether your net worth is also increasing, right? So essentially many things that I talked about in this philosophy. The goal was to provide some more objective digital advisory because oh yeah, a very good question came through Slido. Why would you recommend app instead of just apps for the bank account? There is already a lot of features available there. Good point. For many people, two reasons. Number one is that many people have more than one bank account, especially if they live in a household with someone, but even individual people already spend through more than one bank account, right? For example, I run a lot of my transactions through Revolut, and I also spend from my Slovak bank account. I have friends who spend a part of their time in Czechia, and they have, Revolut, Czech Bank, Slovak Bank, or many of my colleagues have multiple Slovak bank accounts, right? Maybe because of mortgage or something like that, or maybe because partner has a different one or kids have a different one or something like that. So all these issues, in case you have your spending in multiple ones, then you would need something to merge the charts from the banking app together, right? So you would need an Excel sheet anyway to sort of consolidate it. These apps can do it for you. They can link more bank accounts or your partner's bank accounts or your kids, right? And have it there in one overview. Second reason people many times use it is that many times the banking ones just are not sufficient. Either you cannot have budgets there. So I know that in my banking app, I will get that pie chart of transactions, but I'm unable to set a budget. I'm unable to say, okay, restaurants should be, I don't know, 200, right, per month, and tell me what percentage of that I have already spent as of 6th of November, right? This is impossible. So budgets are often unavailable, and many times the categorization is just not really good because it's not a high development priority for the bank. These apps often can do like a better categorization, fewer mistakes. Um, yeah. Another one is I see another question in Slido, so let me answer that. I promised to, to keep it interactive. I tried Finax Coach, but it was useless for me because it did not get credit card transactions. Is there a plan to include them as well? Good point. The reason this is we are unable to do this is because sharing of bank data with PFM apps works under a European directive. I think it's called PDS2, which is like a regulation on sharing these financial data. Currently, it only obliges banks to share with these external providers transactions data from current accounts, right? So there is no legal claim or no legal obligation for banks to share savings accounts or credit instruments or the state of your loans, right? And credit card essentially is a credit facility. It's a loan. So it's not a current bank account that we can access. So the banks just choose, not to share this and not to have this option. It's PSD2. You see that, you can see that in the brackets. I'm stupid. I don't know why I overlooked that. So that is the reason. There's no legislative framework for that yet. There is a draft of a new European legislation called PSD3, which already includes an expanded set of information that the banks would be obliged to share. And that includes credit cards, that includes loans and stuff like that, right? So once that directive is approved and effective, then we will be able to load credit cards. Before that, sadly not. Yeah. If then you probably are better off relying on automation in your banking app or using an Excel spreadsheet. There's just Um, uh, I can see another question in the Slido, but I will defer this one until the end of the presentation, so that we can go over the remaining slides. But thank you for that. That is also a good question and included in the future plans, right? But to answer this last question, yes, credit cards are planned. We need to wait for the legislative framework to be passed. Okay, let's get to a couple of remaining slides. I spend a lot of time talking about, optimizing expenses and finding reserves in your consumption and everything like that. And that is a good thing, right? It's good not to spend a lot of our money on things we don't really want just to impress other people or because we think that it is expected from us and we will feel like losers if we don't spend money on that, a big new car or something like that. So that's a good approach. However, in the long run, so once you've gone over your expenses, you've eliminated the need, ones you don't need, you got at least to 10% of your income on savings. It's the best thing to focus most on your energy on investing in yourself, on learning, upskilling yourself so that you can grow your income. Growing your income, so getting a salary rise in a year or 2 or 5 years, is the easiest way to save because you don't need to change your habits for it, right? You're not used to spending that extra money yet. So even many people who got rich just, worked on improving their incomes over time and managed to boost their savings rate or the amount they invested each month. So it's really important to focus on income growth and try to grow it. The reason is also because there is a floor for expenses, right? You can only cut them to a certain amount, but then there will be a floor, whereas theoretically there's no ceiling on income, right? So how to do that, right? How to invest in your most valuable asset, which is you. In these, and especially in the context of our region, there will be, especially in the future, more and more or a bigger and bigger lack of skilled people, of people who know things, have experienced and are ambitious. So use those ambitions and just learn, acquire skills. It's either good to get it through formal education. So data show that people who have their university degrees usually tend to earn more on average or have their master's degree. So if you can finish it, maybe even in a higher skill field so that you can get a more senior position. Once you have that, you can still continue formally educating yourself in many fields. we all work in finance. There are several formal certifications that you can get that will make you more attractive to employers, right? There's the CFA degree, right? Chartered Financial Analyst, which you have to pay for. It's an investment, but then you have it as an extra title. And in asset management industries, it's a very attractive qualification that might be the reason why you get hired for a senior position in some analysis department or something like that. Accountants or auditors have the ACCA qualifications, right? Or similar things. You can search for them. But also just investing into doing courses, learning to use a new software, learning to use a new data analytics tool, or just asking your more senior colleagues or checking job offers, what sorts of skills are required of jobs that are more paid. It's just an active effort you can take and that you can work towards acquiring. Just doing an online Excel course or doing an online Power BI course so that you are able to work with these tools. I have friends who learned coding and have very well paid software development jobs out of YouTube tutorials, and spend a lot of their young years doing that in their free time, but it's all paid off in the end, right? So many times, and that's what this bullet point is about, right? Many times people focus on picking the right stocks or on saving €3 on a coffee outside, right? But when you compare that with getting a really good senior position in a stable company, then the difference can be insane, because the salary rise over those years that you will have your career will accumulate into tens of thousands of euros, which is extra, right? So that's an insane investment return, and it's one of the best ones that you can do, right? So once you optimize your expenses, don't obsess too much on picking stocks or on saving on coffee dates, right? But try to grow your income and actually invest time and invest money into yourself as your most valuable asset. Okay, we have gone over this. Let's get to the last part of today, which is about emergency fund, right? Emergency fund is an amount of money that you have saved for unexpected expenses, and it should be your first savings goal. If you don't have any savings, start with building up an emergency fund. It can help in various ways, which people often don't even realize. The most obvious one is you might be sick and end up with reduced income, or you might lose your job during an economic recession and struggle to find a new one, and unemployment insurance may not be enough, right? So you can draw supportive income from an emergency fund in these situations. It also acts as a general insurance against any accidents. If your car breaks down and it's really expensive to repair it, you can finance that from emergency fund. If your washing machine breaks down, you can use that money to get a new one, right? But then also, these last three are a bit less intuitive, but still super important. Emergency fund acts as a protection of your long-term investments. In the second lecture, we will be talking a lot about why sticking to a long investment horizon is super important when, for example, investing into index funds on stock markets, right? And if there's a decline or a crisis and you panic and sell it off in a decline, that's usually the worst thing that you can do, right? You can be indirectly pushed to imitate this panicking behavior if you don't have an emergency fund. For example, imagine there's an economic recession, stocks decline, because the economy is in a crisis, but also you lose your job because there's an economic crisis outside, and it's difficult to find a new one because everyone is downsizing. Companies are not hiring. The situation is difficult, right? In this case, you might be forced to liquidate your investment account because you just need money to survive, right? And if stocks were in decline, you might not earn that money back before they recover, and you lose profits, right? You realize a loss in the stock market. So having an emergency fund is also an insurance against being forced to liquidate your long-term investments. It can also serve as a protection from inflation. For example, if energy prices are more expensive one year, your deposit payments in your rent aren't enough, so you need to pay an extra amount at the end of the year. If that's too much, you can use your emergency fund. Or for a short period of time, maybe even higher loan payments can be covered from it after your fixation ends and your interest rate jumps up. But then again, that's not a very long-term solution because your emergency fund will not be enough to pay off your entire mortgage from. But maybe temporarily it can protect you in this situation. And it's also about utilizing opportunities. Even if you never use your emergency fund for an accident, it might give you the psychological comfort to switch jobs or to start a business or to, go do a risk and ask for a raise, or say that you got a better offer somewhere else, right? All these risks are easier to take if you know that you're covered, that the money has your back. So that's also what an emergency fund is about. The next logical question is, what is an optimal emergency fund in terms of size? How much should I save? This is highly individual. It depends on a variety of factors. Essentially, you're trying to assess how protected you need to be. Usually what is recommended is to save up 3 to 6 months of expenses so that you would be able to live purely on your emergency fund for 3 to 6 months, right? Where you locate yourself on this 3 to 6 months of expenses range depends on you. People who have more stable jobs, so for example, they work in state sector where layoffs are not as likely as in private sector companies, or when you're self-employed, they might be closer to the 3 times monthly expenses range. Also, if you don't have kids, if you don't have anyone who depends on you, if you don't have debt that needs to be paid off every month, then you probably don't need as large of an emergency fund. You can just save 3 or 4. If you have debt, if you have kids, if you have people who you are taking care of and who depend on your income, or if you have a business, are self-employed, or if you work in a company that can, during an economic crisis, announce downsizing and layoffs, then it's probably more rational to get more protection and have closer to the 6 months of expenses. So think about these factors and try to include them when locating yourself on the 3 to 6 months of expenses range. Then last question would be, what are some other parameters of the emergency fund besides size? Where to keep it, for example? So a good emergency fund should, in our view, have 3 traits. The first is that it should be liquid. This means that it should be accessible. It should be relatively easy to get to that money quickly if you need it. This means that either at least the portion of the money needs to be accessible immediately, like in a savings account or somewhere where you can transfer it and pay with it immediately. The rest, maybe the other half or something like that, should be accessible within a couple of days, right? So usually when you lose your job, you don't need all of that money in day one or in 5 seconds, but you need to be able to get it within a couple of days, right? You shouldn't take high risks with this. So you don't want to risk, high risk, I mean, by holding it in investments that jump up and down violently because they're risky investments that are unstable, right? Because you risk that it will be in a decline and that you will have only 50% of your emergency fund when you need it most, right? During crises. So you don't want to take too much risks. So holding it all in cryptocurrencies or stocks definitely isn't a good idea. And then you also, this is the third trait. Despite, trying to limit risk, it's good to search for options that at least allow you to beat inflation, right? So that you don't lose money needlessly, but also so that in 10 years, your emergency fund isn't, much less adequate in protecting you against the prices of those days. If prices increase a lot in the meantime, then it might not be enough anymore in 10 or 15 years, right? So if you beat inflation, at least you know that you are covered even in distant future and you don't need to save up some extra money, right, to replenish it. There are a couple of options that are low risk and at the same time achieve some return which matches inflation. One of them might be either looking for high interest savings account. So not if your bank offers like 0.5% that won't protect you from inflation, but there are some banks which already offer pretty decent interest rates nearing 3% or even more. Then there are so-called money market investment products. Money market are super short-term debt products, right? So their value doesn't fluctuate that much. You can either look for so-called overnight ETFs. These are ETFs that just via derivatives replicate the central banks of the interest rates of the central bank, and they are usually very stable and just grow in line with the current interest rate. Or you can search for money market mutual funds if there are some good ones, for example, and don't have too high costs, and similar things. All these things work and should allow you to match inflation at a relatively low risk, right? People in our work also use slightly more high-risk products. So, for example, portfolios composed of roughly 50% stocks and 50% bonds. They use it for like a half of their emergency fund. They keep the remaining half in a savings account with higher interest, but they use this mixed portfolio to sort of appreciate the more longer term part of the emergency fund because they believe that they can afford more risk on it in order to achieve a return above inflation and sort of also work with that money. It's up to you. These last couple of slides will be sort of like a summary to what we were talking about here, right? You might be asking, why is a presentation from an investment company, right? From someone who works a lot with investments, probably does calculations regarding expected returns and stuff like that. Why is it so much about savings rate? Why is it so much about finding room to save money in your budgets? You might even be slightly disappointed saying that maybe you expected to learn something more sophisticated in this first lecture. However, and this is illustrated in this table, the power of savings in building financial wealth is often super underappreciated. We oftentimes see people trying to pick the right stocks, pick the right cryptocurrency, beat the market, be successful investors, trade options, or do like successful day trading because they think that is the way to get rich by earning a higher investment return, earning more percent of profit. However, when you look into this table, it shows two dimensions. If you go from top rows to bottom rows, you increase your investment profit by, always by a couple of percentage points. So the lower you get, the more successful investor you are. If you go from left to right, you manage to save a higher percentage of your income. This is counting with an annual income of 15,000 euros. So this is an investment that lasts 30 years, but the amount that you can see there in the columns is just per year, right? So it's when you invest 1,200 in that third row that is there, that means you're just investing 100 euros a month, right? So it's not super unrealistic for most people's salaries or something like that. So let's start from the bottom left corner, right? You don't save much and you also don't earn much. If you move to the bottom, you can see that, yes, your final built up wealth over the 30 years of investing increases significantly. But let's try to stay with a low return and move from 1% to 10% savings rate, right? You can see that the final amount that you get from your money is more than twice as much as you would get by becoming 10 times the better investor, right? So that is an important lesson. Many times increasing your savings rate by not focusing on trading or worrying about where futures will go and which company will be the most successful one over the upcoming years. But by focusing on growing your income, focusing on becoming better in a career that you like, or on optimizing your expenses and maybe buying a less expensive car and maybe buying a smaller, housing unit or something like that, can often lead you to better results than becoming a super good investor. You may be the best investor in the world, but if you deposit 100 euros over each year, you will not be rich and you will not have financial freedom, right? So it's best to start from increasing your savings rate, and then as the second step, work on becoming a successful investor that can achieve stable returns over their entire life, right? So that is the reason why I talked about this so much, because it's powerful. It can lead you to, unlock high financial wealth is a necessary predisposition to invest in successfully. Okay, that is the end of what I prepared. I have listed some books for you here. All of this was just a relatively brief introduction into the area of personal finance and everything. There are entire books written on this, which have more charts, which have gone into more details, which have included more personal stories of people who have already lived through this entire process. Some of them are listed on the screen. You can take a screenshot if you found this interesting. You can read them. They will be probably articulated in a better way than I talked to you or that I showed here today. Also, as I said, we as Finax publish a lot of similar content on our podcast, on our blogs. So if you want, you can search us out on social media and maybe read some more on the specific topics, some more details on some specific topics that I talked about here. Now it's time for any questions you might have. Thank you for your attention. That is essentially all that I prepared. First, before anything else, I promised to answer the one question that came through Slido. If you have any other, please feel free to post them via Slido or via the chat here. So the question was, is your application offering now the comparison with similar households? For example, comparing how we stand against similar people, etc. Not yet. I know that you probably have this from the fact that this is a long-term plan. Like one of the plans with the coach app that I talked about would be to create sort of like a national database of, the net worth or the net worth, average net worth in different age groups or in different locations of where you live in Slovakia or where you work in Slovakia, or maybe different sectors where you might work. We are working on this. It's like a long-term plan. I can't tell you where the development is or what is the amount of users needed to make that somehow reliable. So yes, in the future, that should be accessible. Feel free to follow us for more updates on this. If you want to make that comparison yourself now, if it's something that you need now, the National Bank of Slovakia, not sure about Poland, Czechia, I bet there are similar databases, but I know that in Slovakia, the National Bank publishes like an annual report, which is a report on the state of the financial situation of households, right? So there they have nicely split it by geographical regions, and they have average net worth, they have average financial assets, they have average debt, they track compositions of debt and similar things. So if you want to maybe find a reference group there geographically, and compare yourself to an average household in your region, you might search that up and sort of look at it. It's interesting data. So yeah, in that report. Controversial question: shared budgeting or bank accounts within the household, or keep the financials separate? That's a good question, because I'm not married myself, so I probably won't be able to tell you that I have experience with both. I guess it's a matter of preference. I know that there's this famous financial book called Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey. He's like host of a radio show in the US, one of the first guys who started talking about these topics. And he also, he has a radio show where people ask him questions. He's also relatively radical in terms of, for example, his approach to debt. He just dislikes any sort of debt, including a mortgage, like pay it off as quickly as you can. But he has an entire chapter in Total Money Makeover dedicated to which is better, whether to keep it separate. I think that he recommended that for him, what worked was for both partners to sort of have some money private, have some personal space with their money. So, while they had shared budget for things like kids or housing or utilities, both of them had like a dedicated amount of money that they could spend anyhow they want it without the other person knowing what it was spent on, because, you want to keep some privacy probably. And that sounds healthy to me, as long as you stick to that maximum limit for your private spending that you have over the month. That sounds logical. I would probably share the big things like utilities, family expenses, housing, and stuff like that. But I myself would probably know to have some personal spends, at least some amount of money that I can spend anyhow I want without anyone knowing how I spent it, right? It's like space. Okay. Oh, there are a lot of questions. Oh my God. Okay. Okay. What resources or books would you recommend for those who would like to become more familiar with the topic? What can be good material for beginner, intermediate, and advanced? Great question. Let's come back to this slide where we have the topics. From these books, my personal favorite is The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. I don't think it's like a big novelty here, because it's probably the most famous book on personal finance of my generation. The reason why I loved it is that it's very easy to read. It's great for beginners. Even if you don't know anything about finance, Morgan is just super talented in telling stories. Most of it is just storytelling about things that worked for him, or how he handled many things. And it's written in a very, very simple language. Like, it's easy to just skim through it quickly. So if you're a beginner, or if you want, literature that is great, it contains all the good lessons. It contains and amazing ways and punchlines to put it, right? I would start with Psychology of Money, probably. People who are already more advanced can probably read more about more of FIRE literature. So that's Financial Independence, Retire Early, right? That's those people who are already, a bit more ambitious, right? They try to retire soon. They try to be really wealthy, and they try to have very ambitious savings rates. That's, for example, Your Money or Your Life, and in the middle there, or Playing with Fire is another book that will probably not be suitable for absolute beginners. It's probably for someone who already has some investing experience and similar things. So that can be like an intermediate thing. Maybe some more advanced books would be more on the technical side of investing. So, for example, um, perfect. So even have it to borrow. We have a shared library here at Finax, so it's also here, and it's as unique employee benefit. You can borrow it from work and read these things. Maybe more advanced things. I'm thinking that would be probably more already about some technical data in terms of either your psychology when you invest and handle money, or investing as such. There's a great book, called Just Keep Buying, which is already more about the technical, inner value that stocks have, and why, stock market is a reliable tool for building wealth. Um, and discusses some more technicalities in the meantime. And also, I had one other idea for an advanced book that isn't here yet. Oh yeah, if you want to know more about psychology that is also relevant for investing, maybe Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman could be suitable. He's not an economist; he's a psychologist, but it's a book that essentially started the movement of behavioral economy, right? And it contains a lot of good lessons that are applicable to investing and to handling personal finance. But that is a tougher one. It's difficult to read because it's essentially like a memoir of the psychological experiments and studies he wrote with his colleague. And it's written in a more complicated language. The design of the experiments is described a bit more technically. So maybe if you're a reader that likes a challenge, that book might be good. Most books that are listed here in front of you are suitable even for beginners, I would say. I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi is amazing. That's more about like automating your finances and using apps and modern instruments and stuff like that. But all of these are intermediate to beginner level. So yeah. And then also, blogs, podcasts, if you're a beginner, I would say are a good thing to learn something about the functioning of these things. They're often easier to digest than whole books and can be valuable, right? What do you think about investing to gold or investing to AI funds? Uh, we will discuss, the strategy I use for investing, or we in general use for investing in Finax in the second lecture. Um, it's no secret that we just buy the market, sort of, right? So we use low cost index funds to sort of replicate the composition of global financial markets, that is buying hundreds or no, not hundreds, thousands of stocks from all the regions there are, and just holding them, right? So just buying regularly and then holding it for 20, 30, 40 years of our lives, right? Without speculating on which sector, which type of company will earn more this year. You just hold all of them, right? What I think about investing into gold or AI companies, that they can be reasonable components of portfolios, right? They can either mitigate the volatility, so how much the portfolio fluctuates. They can also provide some extra return in some periods. I wouldn't invest all my money only into them because it's risky and nothing guarantees that this will be in the long term, a successful investment in a generation. I mean, in 30, 20 years. I personally don't invest in gold because I prefer holding so-called productive assets. So, with stocks, you own a portion of a business. So there is some idea, some product, some service that people regularly pay for. So there's some profit, some repeated cash flow stream that can be increased, right? Something tangible. Gold doesn't have a profit stream. Gold doesn't have an opportunity to enhance productivity or something like that. That is why in the long run it usually earns either lower return. No, it does earn lower returns than stocks in most periods, just because the return potential just logically isn't there as much of it. There isn't as much of it logically because there's no profit tied to it, no like product, idea, service, right? But it can be a reasonable component of a portfolio. Like you don't have to do it this way. Just don't hold everything in it because you're very likely to either not earn as much or even catch really long periods of not earning a high return. Because gold, when you look at it, like search up a graph of gold since 1960s or something like that, you will see that it often moves in spikes. So when there are some crises or tensions or economic troubles, oftentimes it goes sharply up and then stays elevated for a while and then just drops or stagnates for many, many years. And if you are unfortunate with the timing, so you buy it during the peak, during the period when it's has a relatively elevated price, you can experience decades of not earning anything. This would be the case, for example, if you bought somewhere in the middle of the 70s, there was a window of years where you could buy it and you wouldn't earn anything until essentially 2008. So that's almost 40 years of, or 30 years of negative numbers in your account. And you probably don't want to put risk that your entire savings will do this. Investing in AI funds, AI companies are great. They generate a lot of profits. They have a great opportunity to grow. They are naturally included in index funds. So when you hold global passive portfolio, you will have a lot of AI companies there, and they will be nowadays in this year generating a very large portion of the overall profit. So great, of course, and they have potential to grow, and I use their products, right? So it's good to have a cut on it, but I wouldn't over rely only on it, right? So they're a must in a portfolio, of course, because they're an important part of the economy and they earn profits and help improve the world. But I wouldn't now borrow money to invest only into them or something like that. They're just because the fact that they're growing a lot also means that their prices are elevated right now, right? People are already expecting that they will be important in the future, so they are pricier, more costly than other sectors. So all this attractiveness is already included in the prices, and even potential sectors or sectors with high potential can sometimes have weaker performance in the upcoming period, while other sectors that we don't expect so much from can outperform it, and you can never exactly forecast how that happens, right? So yes, hold them, but hold all sectors. don't hold only them. That would be my advice. But both, if you have widely diversified portfolio, can be good assets that worked historically. Okay. Good. I think everyone is already getting tired. I can see people already dropping out. I bet you have places to run to. I'm sorry for running 10 minutes over time, but I wanted to, make sure to answer all your questions. So those of you who are still here, thank you very much for staying even the 10 minutes longer and for paying attention to the presentation. I really appreciate it. I hope it gave you some new insights, maybe some inspiration to take some specific steps that you will do differently. And I will be looking forward to seeing you in the next topic on investing and as the foundation of wealth building. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your evening and yeah, have a nice rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thanks for joining and listening.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.